Apologies in advance for the poor audio from the guest at the beginning of the podcast. This only lasts for about 13 to 14 minutes. We really appreciate your patience. That out of the way, let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the SamMobile Podcast. I'm your host Ben from SamMobile, and welcome to episode 7 of the SamMobile Podcast, pretty much your weekly podcast that gives you all the latest news in the world of Samsung, weekly, daily, all put together on a show where we pretty much talk it out. And this one is going to be a big one. Pretty much going to be an episode dedicated to the aftermath that is Google I/O 2022, which was actually in person. And we're going to discuss all the things that was discussed and announced and how that actually affects Samsung for the rest of the year into next year, and it shapes things up. And yes, it's not a solo episode. You do have a guest today, which is so good for me, man. So yes, as I always say, get your meal, get your popcorn, get your drink, sit back. It's definitely gonna be a good show. So as you can see, we do have a special guest, and he's a good mate of mine. Like, I've known him sometimes what feels like way too long. I bother him a lot on a daily basis. You know, he's a good friend. He's a good colleague in the industry. I literally dub him as the king of all things Android showcase when it comes to software, especially when it comes to beta. Like, he rules it. But you know what? Let me not waste too much time. I'm going to pass it over to him to introduce himself to you all. And yeah, that's it, man.
You've definitely hyped me up too much there. My name's Damien. I've how long have we known each other, Ben? 4 or 5 years now, maybe longer.
2018.
Yeah, so it's a long time. It's a long time, isn't it? But I am the lead videographer at 9to5 Google. I've been doing this since around 2018 when I met Ben. And he's definitely hyped me up too much, but I do like to think I know a little bit about Android, probably more so than the average person.
Listen, this is if being too humble was a person, it'll be him. Anytime I see him post any software showcase videos, I'm like, bro, I don't know how you do it. Because, you know, our SamMobile viewers, you guys know that we are the place for all things One UI, and I struggle, bro. I really struggle. So definitely, man, you're
just
downplaying
spreadsheets,
it, man.
Just keep spreadsheets. And I think sometimes having multiple devices is always really useful to kind of have one to refer to. So I'll have I've got like all of the pixels, and I kind of keep one on an older version and one on a newer version, and I can just refer to side by side. But I know you've done that with One UI, and I know that if I ever am experiencing something with a Samsung phone, I've asked you before, you know that. The people out there don't know that, but you're the person I go to when I want to find out things about Samsung One UI.
Nah, bro, I appreciate you, man. Man. How you been anyway?
Good. I'm very tired from something we're going to talk about in a moment, but apart from that, very, I'd say busy. But
of course.
Like yourself, it's just, sometimes it just feels like it's never ending. Sometimes it just feels like the tech industry never ends. It definitely feels like that.
Yeah. It's that back to back. So we just take it as it comes.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just got to realize that like time doesn't exist in this industry.
It doesn't.
It's 24 hours, 48 hours. It doesn't matter. It's just how it goes.
Bro, give me the superpower to just pause time legitly so we can just get everything done so it doesn't escape us. That's how it feels most of the time, innit?
Well, to be fair, this is the first year I've ever drunk Red Bull, apart from Jaeger bombs. So I've started drinking Red Bull now. So not on a daily basis. Like when I need Red Bull, I'll get a Red Bull. But before that, it was only ever in Jaeger bombs. So it definitely brings back flashbacks every time I'm on a late night video edit. I'm like, oh god. This is definitely not a time for a Jaeger bomb, but it's just plain Red Bull.
Mate, plain Red Bull. And mate, as always, man, you are resident for 9to5 Google. You are the host and video producer and also writer there as well, just to add. And you are literally the perfect guy to have, because we had Google I/O 2022 yesterday, 11th of May. Now, we were meant to actually record this podcast on a Tuesday just to give reference, but I completely forgot that I/O was happening on Wednesday.
I had to tell you, I was like, no, that's not happening.
It's not happening. Like, we need to actually do it later so we can actually gauge what's happening. And we're recording this on the 12th of May on a Thursday. I/O happened. It was back in person. And I've got to say, right, that is probably one of the best and strongest ways to reintroduce in-person events again. It felt refreshing. I don't know what you think, but I mean, give me your 2 cents on what you thought of the event first of all.
was kind of shocked in a lot of ways, because there's quite a few things that were revealed that you wouldn't have expected to get revealed, and even ahead of time, kind of knowing a few things, having like embargo things like that. There's even a few like curveballs thrown in, and like from a what is a developer conference? That's first and foremost, it's aimed at developers, isn't it? So just to get so many hardware releases, like important hardware releases, and then the thing I think that was really impressive about the entire keynote is that they can back it up with actual developer-led courses, developer-led sessions. So you're going to get the hardware, but also you're getting the software as well, which is like the main thing that drives the devices that we've seen and that have been revealed. So I think I don't want to say Google knocked it out of the park, but in terms of a hardware perspective, I think
they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, they definitely got to a point where I think the average person may take notice. I don't think that's always the case. But hopefully there's going to be some interesting products, especially later this year, that people might be really interested in.
Now, you see, you touched on software. We're going to talk about that, but I want to give my verdict. I'm being honest, they knocked out the park. It felt refreshing hearing, if I'm just looking at the event, 2 hours, right? How it was split up, pacing was perfect. It was kind of refreshing to see real human beings making mistakes live, kind of having the awkward pauses between claps and jokes. And weirdly enough, I missed that. I missed the imperfections that come with in-person events. So it was really good to see that. It's really good that they did it well. And it's good to have that back after just the years that we've had. But software, right? That first 1 hour to kind of like the general mass public before the main nitty-gritty of what happens with developers happened, right? I was very impressed. Software. I mean, Google went in when it came to search. They went in when it came to things like privacy. They went in when it came to things like personalized ad experience. You know, they went in, especially on the big one, which I told you, you're my guy for it, man. You were up late. Android 13 Beta 2, Android 13 in general, and how that shapes up what Android is as a foundation. And then one of the things we talked about in the previous episode on the podcast, One UI 5 based on Android 13 beta, potentially coming out in July, right? I want to get your 2 cents, especially you doing your breakdowns of Android in terms of the core vanilla or stock or Google experience version of Android. From what we're seeing, what's your take of it first? And then how is that going to shape into what you're seeing from Samsung?
Well, I mean, because Android 12 was so big for Google anyway, for Google and a few other OEMs, I think that it's only ever going to be a refinement year. So we kind of had this with Android 9 through Android 11. There wasn't much change year over year. There was little things added that kind of helped round out Android as it was. Samsung had to do that previously by themselves. If they wanted a feature, they had to add it. Be that one-handed mode, be that dark mode, be that anything related to kind of like overall usability features that may have existed on iOS, or they may have existed just in normal computing terms. But Samsung kind of had to do that themselves originally. And it feels as though Google's kind of caught up. Sure, there's a few things that they're behind in. So while I think visually there's still a big divergence between One UI and what I would call Pixel experience. Not to be confused with a third-party ROM, by the way, which is very much like the Pixel experience. I think that Samsung's kind of move away into its own little kind of corner, and I wouldn't say it's a little corner by any stretch of the imagination, because it's still such the biggest player by some margin. I think that we'll see Samsung take on a few things that Google is doing rather than the other way around, because realistically, One UI, it hasn't changed visually that much in the past 3 or 4 years. Sure, we've seen a lot of refinements and a lot of improvements, and they've come a long way from what fans out there would hate, the TouchWiz days. I think it stands on its own 2 feet. Whether or not Samsung will take certain cues as part of the new material design frameworks remains to be seen. Because obviously I think even just from a sales perspective, if you go into a store or you go online and you see you see a Pixel OS side by side with Samsung, there's definitely some crossover now, whereas previously I don't think that was necessarily the case, even down to the hardware with the Pixel 6 series.
Yeah. That's very true. And that in itself speaks a lot about how much Google actually, they respect Samsung in a way. And I want to say it in a good way, not because they're not owning their own identity. I mean, the second half of that conference was full of announcements that, let's be honest, no other OEM does, right? So they are really on the road to owning their own hardware identity. So that's not the case. But I think they do respect Samsung enough to not be scared to call out their partnerships with them when it comes to things like Wear OS, right? Not to actually be scared to consider foldables, you know, not to actually be scared to consider the fact that, yeah, to be honest, we dropped the ball when it came to the larger screen Android experience, but Samsung have been carrying it so much that they actually have the premium Android tablet space kind of patterned up and secured.
Yeah.
Not scared to mention that as well, you see. So it's funny. I go back to before I joined SamMobile, I did a reaction video to last year's I.O., which was virtual, unfortunately, sadly, because of the situation. And the very things I complained about, it's almost like they listen. The neglect for the larger screen experience on a core basis, right? Not with an OEM that's having to shoehorn their experience in, you know, to brute force things, but the core experience working well. What I saw with Google yesterday really impressed me, like things like 20 plus core Google apps finally getting the optimization for the larger screen experience from what we saw you showcasing, for example, with Android 12L, you know, coming into Android 13 now. And then the main thing that I was singing away was, okay, core foundation apps is good, third party. And the fact that they put things like TikTok, Facebook, Canva out there, I was like, okay, now we're talking. How do you think that makes the experience going forward important for things like foldables? Let's just touch on foldables first.
Well, I kind of think you need to look at the entire picture to understand why foldables is so important. So I think from a Google-led perspective, Android being successful with no matter who the OEM partner is beneficial to Google, because at the end of the day, the software is still Google software underlying principally. I think with the foldable side of things, Samsung has led the way with foldables. They had a proof of concept with the original Fold, and maybe that will benefit them in terms of the actual flexible OLED hardware for things like kind of like maybe even like fabrics and foldable screens that can fit into places such as cars and things like that. But that's another discussion entirely. In terms of an actual usability foldable device that's in your pocket, it makes a lot of sense because the tablet market's really stagnated over the past few years. And I think Samsung was the first to really look at it and think, okay, people want bigger screens, but they don't necessarily want bigger phones. So initially, they probably had to overcome a lot of software issues because of that kind of paradigm of opening your phone and having a new UI that is more tablet-like. And then on the inside, on the outside, or the inside, no matter, depending on who has made the foldable, you kind of have to have a normal traditional phone form factor. And I think Samsung's closer work with Google is only going to be beneficial to everybody else, because I don't know if you've tried the Oppo Find N. The Oppo Find N really suffers from the fact that it hasn't been optimized with partnership or in partnership with Google, because sadly, I don't know where it is, but I could have shown you that there's a few issues with the way it handles folding in and out, and certain applications don't work on a bigger screen. That part of that is down to the fact that it is technically a small tablet, and Google's neglected tablets over the past few years. And another part of that is that they haven't worked with the actual developers who are producing software for foldable displays. Samsung's really, whether or not they've put Google in a corner or they've kind of decided to work more closely because they know that they have a leg up over everybody else in the industry, they've made a really shrewd decision to do that, because the foldable market is only going to increase year over year. If you are the premier foldable smartphone maker, despite the fact that you had a flawed product to begin with, which I still think was proof of concept in the original Fold, they can kind of blanket the market and push the foldable OS, be that Android 12L, be that anything else. That can be one of those things where they can really lead everybody else and say, right, we make the decisions on the foldable software. So I'm not sure. I'm not really sure if Google are really worried about Samsung having such a large market share for those larger screen devices, because in essence, it will only benefit them. And when we do eventually see a Pixel Fold, it will be feature complete and will compete directly with the likes of the Z Fold 4 and Z Fold 5, whatever they happen to be, and even maybe the Z Flip. So to correct myself, I'm used to saying Z for the American audience.
Oh, mate, listen, it's like the pressure to always want to use it. It's like, it's Z, people, accept it. That's what we say.
Yeah.
Where I'm in agreement with you is that I just like the fact that Google woke up to the truth, accepted the truth, and are working with the truth rather than against it. Not necessarily because they're doing things bad, but against it in the sense that neglect is literally working against the progress, right? So them waking up to it, knowing that ultimately it's going to benefit us, right? Because our service model is the ability to have access to everything for everyone, right? Especially through search, especially through core services. When it comes to things like workspace, like we saw all the new, developments to Google Docs with the, auto summarization, which, mate, for guys like us, Lord, that is a good benefit for things like SEO. We can have a quick summary, put in the SEO for video description, and then we know that the script that we've done is in there, because I live on Google Docs. It's great for stuff like that, right? I'm just happy that they woke up to the truth to be like, okay, we need to capitalize this. Like, we're missing it to the point where it's going to draw people in. Now, the main thing I want to see is the bigger screen form factor is good, because obviously foldables are unique because their aspect ratios are kind of weird in a way, right? If you get one aspect ratio correct for the foldable inner display or outer display, the normal phone screen or outer display is a bit off. Like if you look at the Fold, it's a super skinny 25:9 aspect ratio, right? And then you go into the tablet display, it's not entirely a 16:9 or 16:10
boxy, isn't it?
Of what you. It's a weird kind of boxy. It's a 5:4 aspect ratio, not even a 4:3 like what we're used to. So I want to see how they compensate for that, the optimization. But the main thing I want to see is how well does continuation work, right? Because let's just say for the Samsung foldables at the minute, you have to use good lock to be able to brute force certain apps to continue from the outer screen to the inner display. And that is a big part of what makes it enjoyable. That without that, in my personal opinion, as a massive foldable connoisseur and a foldable fan, it seriously takes away from the experience, right?
Yeah.
How are they going to sort that out? And do you think, I'll ask you that question, it's a simple yes or no, or an expansion. Do you think Google realized how important that level of continuation is across the software spectrum, first party and third party, to the user experience of foldables?
100%. I think that if you use any phone, no matter who it happens to be from, and the apps are not up to scratch, people will blame Android. They won't blame necessarily whoever it happens to be. Android gets the blame. They may say that, I don't know, Oppo, Realme, Samsung, Google, they're bad phones. The problem is that technically reflects badly upon the Android space. So if you have good first-party apps, no matter the form factor, people are going to stay in your ecosystem. And I hate that term ecosystem, but Google looks like they're trying to build that out, because Samsung have tried to do it themselves recently. But the more help that you get from the biggest OEMs and the creator of the software that you're running on your devices, the better it's going to be. I mean, I think Nearby Share is a good example of that. Yeah,
that's a good one. That's a good shout. That's definitely a good shout. And I think that is the potential small source difference and also Achilles heel. Because the reason why I say that is that you want the experience to be as seamless as possible, where the person that's using it, regardless of their skill set, whether techie or be of a better term, average consumer, feels less friction to want to use the device, right? I'm speaking for myself that when I first got the Fold 2, if it wasn't for one of the other content creators online that said, hey, use good lock. If you use good lock, you get these other options. My first impressions video was going to be a very salty one, because I immediately felt frustrated of, I'm using a phone as a normal phone with this app on the outer display. Now I want to get to the bigger one and it's closed. Now the layout is different on the inner display. Now I have to open it up again, start it, and when I want to close it to go to the outer display, it closes. And I'm like, why am I fighting with this? It felt very frustrating. So I'm thinking, imagine me that I've got the time and patience for it. Someone else would be like, hey, I'm just not about that life, you see. And it is very promising to see that, Google are just getting back to that and seeing that, hey, that needs to be something that needs to be done, right? We need to let developers know that, as well as, the larger screen form factor is back to having better scaling. Like back in the day, you had a Twitter app that was literally a scaled up version for the big screen. Pixel for pixel looked great, but in terms of proportioning it made no sense.
Yeah, usability wise, it doesn't work. Yeah,
it doesn't work. So the usability is now in place, great, but the continuation and how that's optimized should be in place as well. And that's one thing I cannot wait to see, because not only is it gonna, how I see it is this: the core OS is going to be really well optimized.
Yep.
Then that means OEMs don't have to go heavily intensive with, as people like to call it, skins on top, right? I actually see what OEMs put on top as a whole nother operating system in its own way, on top rather than a skin. It just means that they don't have to go that hard on it. That extra layer is almost like that extra layer of icing on top of a cake.
Yeah.
Better. Android used to be named after dessert, so it kind of makes sense. That extra icing on top of the cake, that is the OEM UI skin. The skinnier it is and the more well spread and put together it is, the better the user experience, right? That's my thought. I don't know if that's your thought pattern, but that's what I'm thinking is going to be the benefit of what I saw when it came to the software side of it for Android 13 for the bigger display.
Yeah, I think, the less shoehorning of feature sets and kind of usability aspects that you need to put into an OS, the better it's going to be. I mean, you can look at it from a ruthless perspective. Google are going to release their own foldable at some point, and every other OEM in the industry is now following Samsung's lead and trying to build a foldable device. If you can, if you can help, or you can be part of helping another brand who is, Google will never directly compete with Samsung as far as I'm concerned in terms of device sales. There's just too much mass. There's just you just can't they can't reach the mass market in the way that Samsung can. If Google understand that they're not going to compete directly, then why wouldn't they want to gain some benefit from the fact that they're helping them develop a piece of software? Let Samsung make mistakes, which they have done previously with some of their pieces of software, and then we can effectively make our product almost perfect upon launch. That's not always the case, is it? Hardware failures exist, and software is software. It's always going to have bugs. But from a simply ruthless perspective, I think there's definitely a play there by Google. They understand that we're not going to compete, so why don't we help shape our own destiny a little bit more? And obviously, as I said before, it reflects. If you have a bad operating system and you're supposed to be the gatekeeper of that, it's just going to reflect badly upon you. Samsung are going to come complain to Google as their biggest customer. It all kind of makes sense. It's almost like cannibalizing itself. But I'm interested to see how they're going to tune certain applications for specific display sizes, because like you said, there's a lot of, sometimes even when you use a normal smartphone application, you're like, this doesn't work for this size of screen, and then you're having to use reachability or one-handed mode, and I feel that's where it fails a little bit. Certain UIs fail a little bit if you're having to use extra software features to actually use an app effectively. So hopefully we'll get to see a bit more like one-handed usability, where certain UI portions are at the corner of your display or down where your thumb would ordinarily sit, because there's no denying that most foldables are two-hand phones once you get it unfolded.
And I'm looking at my notes on some of the things that actually just got released. Obviously, beta 13, beta 2 for Android 13 got released for a slew of manufacturers. Samsung wasn't on it, which it makes sense just because of how much ownership they take of One UI. But you see, what that tells me in terms of timescale, especially with all the beta coverage you did for One UI 4 last year, is that July rumored time of arrival for One UI 5 beta with Android 13 feels very imminent. What excites me about it is, again, going back to my original point of core features being there so that the layer can be reduced and spread better, much more finer. One of the features that I saw with copy and paste from phone to tablet, loved it. Stuff like that, where Samsung have been in the hardware ecosystem with flagship phones like the S22 Ultra, supporting S Pen, the same S Pen that you can use for your Tab S8 or Tab S8 Plus, Tab S8 Ultra, right? Having that core feature that's built into Android where you can copy and paste without the need of it being in one UI, and that layer can come down, making the software to hardware access via APIs much more seamless, less buggy. I'm looking forward to more of that just being implemented. It's nice to have the core optimized software work better with the bigger screens, but also just how it works with the smaller screens back and forth and the parity. Like more of the material like what you're saying, Samsung have taken more ownership of how One UI looks, but there is still core foundational software that when it leans more into Material You, I don't see that as a bad thing. Again, in your breakdown video, you talked about the joke of the media controls, right? Stuff like that. I want to see more of it. I want to see more of that integration as well. I want to see more of what they showcase with things like having control over your personalized ads, let alone search removal from Google based on what you want and stuff. I want that to be in and integrated more, where I think that would just be the key difference for that user experience to really come up.
Mm-hmm.
That's for Android 13 in general, right? We can we can go on for Android 13, but the last bit I want to touch on that really just wraps up this initial 1 hour of what we saw from iOS software, Wear OS, right? I'm not much of a watch person. I'm gonna be very, very honest. So for me to be excited for Wear OS, it says a lot. It says a lot. And again, the partnership that they had with Samsung is something that they announced. And through that, it showed that they're expanding more devices being sold. They said 3 times more devices that were sold. I don't know what that is in reference to, but they're saying that, right? How do you think, away from what we saw at the end with Google, the Pixel Watch, how do you think now Wear OS is going to come into its own going forward with what we saw?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think that because Samsung are probably the biggest smartwatch manufacturer outside of Apple, being on Wear OS is only going to be a benefit, because if you're putting out the Galaxy Watch every year with Wear OS installed, and it works more seamlessly with your phone and potentially other phones, because I use it with the Pixel 6, the Galaxy Watch 4, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. I'm not a huge fan of the Classic. I didn't pick that one up. I picked up the standard Galaxy Watch 4. But if it works better with any Android phone that you use, that's only going to be a benefit to anyone. So before, with the older Samsung Galaxy Watches with Tizen, I felt like I wouldn't pick them up because I do change phones quite often. So if it wasn't going to work effectively with a Realme phone, or an Oppo phone, a Pixel, anything that happens to be like that, I would have difficulty using it day in, day out. And I think that having this partnership with Google, Samsung's direct partnership, is only going to make better smartwatches long term, because they're going to work with everything else. And Samsung can pick up customers. So they've been clever on that aspect. So, Google have been clever by getting the biggest smartwatch manufacturer outside of Apple on their team again. And so, it's just only going to be beneficial. And I must say that the Galaxy Watch 4 is the first smartwatch that I've worn every single day since I've had it. Today I haven't, because I've left it on charge in another room. But it's the only smartwatch that I've used consistently, because it does everything that I need it to do. It's not laggy. The performance is good. The screen is good. The hardware is made by Samsung, so it's going to be excellent as it is. The accessories that you have available are always very good as well, because Samsung has partnerships with accessory makers. And I'm really pleased with the product, and it running Wear OS for a full year on its own. You could have seen that could have been an exclusivity period that Samsung and Google came to terms with and said, okay, we're going to have an exclusivity period. The only smartwatch available right now is running Wear OS, because you're the biggest partner and you're going to be the biggest salesperson. Because Fossil, Diesel, while they're all under the same group, and they've all definitely helped Wear OS get to where it is, because you have a lot of different lovely form factors, because there's traditional watches, there's classic style watches, there's bracelet styles, there's all these different things you can get from the Fossil group, but the performance has always just been a little bit lacking. And Wear OS itself has felt neglected for such a long time. If you just want the basics, it's fine. If you want anything more than that, the performance would be terrible, battery life would be terrible. But until last year, it didn't feel like there was any real commitment to it. And now I think moving forward, we're going to have better wearables wholesale. So maybe we'll see the likes of OnePlus, the likes of Xiaomi, the likes of obviously any of the BBK groups. So Oppo, they have a Wear OS watch. I'm hoping that over time, we'll see more OEMs jump onto Wear OS and we'll have just better watches in general.
One thing I loved what you said that I didn't think of was exclusivity. And do you know what it brought me to? One UI 4.1. There was a lot of actually core features in there that were exclusive to Samsung that were native Android apps, right? Look at Google Duo, for example. Samsung, had that exclusivity of screen sharing, being able to screen share, watch together, through Google Duo. And that's something that wasn't actually available on the Pixel devices, even on their latest Pixel drop featured months, So I think actually
it is available now. I think it is available now.
It's available now.
Yeah.
But it's like what you said about that exclusivity period, looking at, the Galaxy Watch 4, which I agree. I prefer the normal Watch 4 rather than the classic as well. I think the sports band is really nice, especially in the green color.
Yeah.
I don't know what color you got it in, but the green color is really nice.
Like a fibrous, I don't know how to describe it. It's like an elasticated, it's almost like a fiber band. It's really good. But
the design of the Watch 4, I much preferred it. But I think you saying for that period how it's been able to jump sell them and upscale Wear OS on a platform level, because
I think
Samsung,
it increases the installer base as well. That's the main thing. I think that's once you get people on something in terms of like software, they get used to it. They like all the applications that come with it. And sorry to railroad you there, but I kind of agree.
No.
I kind of agree with the idea that Samsung can really benefit, and so can Google. So it's just this symbiotic relationship is stretching way beyond just smartphones now. It's going into every other aspect. I mean, I don't think it'll happen in hearables, I think they're called now, headphones and earbuds. But for the core devices, there's definitely going to be a lot of more kind of coexistence than there wasn't before. It felt like there was rivals. Everyone was rivals with each other. But a lot of the time, the better it is for people to switch, the better it is for brands to work in tandem with each other. The products end up being fairly similar, but enough different that you're going to pick one over the other anyway.
You've said the best thing to wrap it up before we even talk about the miscellaneous stuff. And in that thing of friction, that's what caused friction, let's be honest. That constant competing, and that's what I always wanted to get to, that the core foundation needs to be seamless enough to make things like not just updates be more consistent and more easier, but also that user experience. When that user experience is more stable, it's more consistent, as well as rich as they want, that's what gives people confidence in the platform. And that's what's been lacking. And I'm just happy that it looks like it's getting to that direction. Here's another thing just to add to kind of, look at the recaps. Things like, look at what they're doing to expand Google Translate. Hey, I'm from Ghana, and one of the native languages is finally in there, Chi. I was like, what? 24 core languages that's in there. That's more confidence in a platform for someone that's going to use Android when they're in that situation for translating, whether it's for holidays or teaching. In that situation, you saw the new version of Google Glass at the end with the subtitle, live subtitle translation on there. I lost it. I went crazy. If you're looking at things like the AI power of immersive mode, where they don't even have to scan inside of a restaurant, and you can have like a proper high detailed 3D look of how restaurants or places look inside, that to me is crazy. If you're looking at things like, workspace, like we talked about, right? Scene exploration, all these things being at the core, making it rich, but also just giving that stability that is going to be the biggest difference. Like, you can be different, i.e. like what you say, OEM differentiation, that layer, that icing on top, right? But not at the cost where the icing on the top or the layer, it's literally so big, it's almost causing a friction.
Yeah.
And then you're expecting Google to, at the core, give that incentive to make that icing less. It's what caused the friction. And I'm so glad to see that was the turnaround of this event. That's my takeaway, right? I'm going to ask you your highlight for that first 1 hour section, and then I'll mention mine, then we'll pretty much wrap up this one and get to the next part. What was your highlight of that first 1 hour?
It's a tough one because we're potentially talking about things that might not affect us right now. But I really like the use of machine learning to pick up languages and things like that for the translate. That's cool. But I think the best one is probably you alluded to it, is being able to view inside venues and restaurants in selected cities without them having to take images. Like, that sounds insane. It doesn't sound that sounds like science fiction.
It is,
and that is the start. Like, I think that's that kind of sums up.
They do it.
That sums up the way that Google approaches their business model is all software led. Obviously, Samsung is hardware led. And I think that definitely they will. The problem might not even exist, but Google will solve the problem that doesn't exist. Whereas Samsung will create the product that doesn't exist. And I think that's my key takeaway from this, is that there's a lot of software additions that we take for granted now, like Google Search, Google Translate, using the assistant on a day-to-day basis. And the things that they mentioned in the keynote, you might not think they're important now, or they may seem important. Some things will be, some things won't be. But I'm interested to just see what kind of sticks and what doesn't, because Google has a notorious history of killing products and killing services. Maybe when fans don't want them to, but I'm really interested to see just how that develops over the next couple of years.
Here's my one. This is a one that almost eluded me. The Monk's scale for skin tones. I don't know if you remember seeing this, but the fact that there's a real tone filter coming into Google Photos, clap. I think that is such a game over. For my own personal use, I'm not going to name this brand, but I did a recent camera comparison, and the disappointment in how bad in perfect lighting situation, I mean, outdoors, sunny, how often do we get a sunny day in UK? But when you get it, you take advantage and do a camera comparison. That's just how I think, right? The disappointment and how bad the skin tone processing was for a person of my skin shade. Thank goodness Google are going to actually implement this API. They said the API is going to be open source. You can implement it from our API to get the right skin tone representation, not just for pictures that have been taken after the fact, but for video calls. I don't know how they're pulling this off, but for video calls, when you have a rubbish webcam, for example, forget making the webcam just bright in terms of exposure, but actually getting your skin tone correct on that scale, regardless of who you are, that's the difference maker. Stuff like that is what sets the platform apart from not just being rich, but stable, where imagine someone sending you a picture after the fact and you're thinking, this just does not look right. And call a spade, right? People of my skin shade, they've been taking pictures in certain situations where they can't be seen properly because, unfortunately, that camera isn't able to process and differentiate that level of dynamic range. Imagine being able to fix that in Google Photos because of a raw tone filter. I think, to me, that is just next level AI. And that was my kind of secret highlight for seeing that for I/O yesterday, before they just went kind of ham with all the hardware that came after. Wrapping it up, I have to say that was probably the best I/O event I've seen, in my personal opinion. Great job, Google. Great way to make a statement to bring back in-person events. And in my personal opinion, as glamorous as pre-recorded live events or pre-recorded events have been, I kind of want to see less of it now because of Google. So yeah, that is pretty much the first, and I mean, it's been a large first sector, right? That's the end of the first sector of the SamMobile Podcast for episode 7. We've pretty much deep dived as much as we could for I/O, how what Google have announced pretty much shapes into the core of Android, what that means for Samsung in terms of the software experience, especially the hardware experience later on down the line. We're going to take a short break. Don't go too far. We need to obviously give ourselves a bit of time, have a water break, have maybe a little bit of snack. Don't go too far. Don't miss us too much. As you know, the tradition that goes right now, that when we do have a guest, we are going to put them in a hot seat question and ask them, what is their expectations of Samsung for the rest of 2022 and potentially dipping into the next year, 2023. Don't go too far. We will be right back. And we are back. Hopefully you didn't miss us too much. Of course, we missed you guys, but hopefully you didn't miss us too much and kind of needed a break to just have a bit of water, come back in. And we are pretty much on the final leg, the last sector of episode 7. And as you know, once we have a guest in, we've got to put the guest into the hot seat and ask them the hot seat question on what their expectations are from Samsung for the rest of 2022 and potentially dipping into 2023. And here's why we always like to ask that question. Like I see it this way. We started this podcast, you know, Q2 at the beginning of April, and the first quarter of the year. And I mean, Damien, me and you have been going to pretty much, minus MWC, every single one of these product launch announcements on Samsung, right? Mm-hmm. They've been kind of going hard at it from the jump. We were talking about S21 FE, then they had their freestyle projector, all their display tech from the Odyssey, you know, all the stuff that they announced at CES come back mid, what you call it, February, which was probably the most nightmare one with all the tablets, all the S-series phones.
Yeah.
Like PTSD when you think about such a madness of a day.
I'm definitely thinking about that event. That was terrible, but good, but terrible.
Mate, you know, and then obviously you had the Galaxy Book series, and then obviously closing it off, we linked up again with the A series. They've been busy. Things are a little bit calm now. But looking at it, especially after I/O as well, anything that you think, what is your expectation for Samsung for the rest of 2022?
I've got a few things, to be fair. I think, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, One UI 5.0 has got to be a big release, I think. I may be speaking from my own personal perspective there, but One UI 4.0 didn't really feel that different from One UI 3. Mm-hmm. So if One UI, if they're going for a refinement process, so okay, we're going to add bits at a time, that's fine. But I feel like there hasn't been a big overhaul. Like, I'm speaking from someone who covers a lot of Google products specifically. The big overhaul last year with brand new proper flagship devices, revamped Android 12, kind of redesigned everything. Samsung has kind of just kept things, just keep going. We'll do that with the hardware. We'll do our speaking with the hardware. I think One UI 5.0 really needs to kind of like step up to the mark now, because they're still the premier Android OEM on the planet. They make phones at every single price point. There is a lot of cannibalization with Samsung's smartphone lines. You look at the recent A53 series and the A33. Like, for most people, I think they're probably going to be better in terms of actual like price per performance or whatever it happens to be. They're probably going to be a better buy than, say, the A70 series, or in some cases the S21 FE and the S22. Like, Samsung hasn't differentiated as much in the hardware as they would have done previously. They would keep things quite separate. The A series wouldn't be as good as the S series. And it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels as though they're treating their normal smartphone lines like the S, A, M, I think, abroad. Like, there's the Fold, then there's the Flip and the Fold, and they're in their own category. So maybe there needs to be some sort of kind of real software differentiation between them, because unless you want a foldable, all of those phones are quite similar, really. Realistically, there is differences. I'm definitely boiling it down to the simplest common denominator there, but there is a lot of...
No, of course.
There needs to be a lot more difference. But at the same time, I kind of like that, because looking at the A series, for instance, when we're going through a point in time where people don't have as much money in their pocket, they want to hold onto the devices for longer, the software promises from Samsung is really, really good. 5 years is incredible to support any phone, no matter what price point. If you're doing it for under that €400, £400, $400 price range, that's insane. The value that you get.
They're doing the most then.
They're doing the most. And I think maybe we'll see more of that over the coming years. We're going to see cheap phones come with 6-7 years of software support. And I think that's really, really good. But whether or not they're going to do that, they're going to have the bigger phones have even longer support. I'm not so sure, but Samsung doesn't really have as much of an excuse in global regions when they make their own chipsets. I understand for Qualcomm and the licensing issues and the support from Qualcomm Direct is not quite as long, but I think it's a twofold thing that I'm interested to see what Samsung do for the rest of the year, what they do with the hardware, and what they do with the software as a result of that. And obviously, I cover software every day, so that's where my focus would be.
You're our first guest to actually mention One UI in terms of One UI 5 in general. Most have just talked about the actual specific products, like, hey, I'm looking forward to the Fold 4, which that's me, or we had Ryan last week and he was talking about Samsung display specifically, which obviously is a different department and different section to electronics with what they're doing with QD OLED. Obviously their Samsung S95B TV that's out, stupid expensive, but hey, very impressive. But One UI, you touching on One UI, I agree with you in the sense that it's not even just about a fresh lick of paint. We go back to that analogy of that is their icing on the cake. They need a new icing now. You need to just take the icing off and really put like a new flavor of the icing that we can see that actually translates to how special the hardware innovation is and what they're doing for foldables, for tablets, and also for even things like, what they're doing with wearables and stuff, right? I do agree. I think the look, I don't even think from One UI 3, I just feel like from the inception of One UI in general, it's kind of felt the same. If I'm just going for memory, it hasn't felt different enough in terms of, especially if you're looking at the aesthetics and how the aesthetics react. If I go back to all the videos that I've done in terms of showcasing One UI, from our favorite features to tips and tricks to each beta, the very thing that people always harp on about is the little things, right? How the animations react. And it's not because they're not fast, it's fast, but there's like how in PC, the PC gaming market, you talk about back in the day, we always measured maximum frame rate. It does this, then it became average, then it became minimum, then it became lower percentage, 1% lows and whatnot. And then one thing that really got harped on was frame pacing and frame timing, right? Your frame pacing and frame timing to stop those odd stutters, even though you are getting a fast experience, is so noticeable in terms of perception that it makes a difference to the user experience. And I think that's what they need to also work on, tightening those joints. And also, like what you said, really just stepping it up where it looks as major as what Google did with the core look of their experience for Android 12 coming from 11. Because it didn't feel that way enough. So I'm eager to see how that will look like come July. I know I'm saying July, and for anyone coming after me, like, I don't have any,
insider info,
crystal ball. I don't have any inside info, but what I'm saying based on previous episodes and previous videos that we've done on SamMobile, especially with Beta 2 that's out, and a list of manufacturers that were actually showcased to be working to get those betas in, I don't think Samsung want to miss out on that. Hell no. They definitely don't want to miss out on that. So I agree. There needs to be a major overhaul. If that happens, do you think it's going to happen in time for foldables, or it's going to happen in time pushing into next year's Galaxy S23? What do you think that timescale will look like?
I think, given the fact that Samsung tends to have later previews and developer previews and like public-facing beta, whatever you want to call them. I think Samsung is definitely now foldable LED. And I think that's definitely making a lot of their decisions for them. So if they're going to go with like a big new liquor paint and overhaul, then it's going to be foldable LED, I think. And obviously with Google not making their own foldable this year, they're definitely in a position to do it. So if they say we're gonna overhaul One UI 5.0, they could do it a little bit like they did the Galaxy Watch last year with Wear OS. So no more Tizen, here's Wear OS 3. No more One UI that you kind of stagnated a little bit. It's not stagnated, that's the wrong word to use. But there's a few things that I get the, before I go off on about One UI, because I do like it. It just feels as though it's Samsung's approach is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we're going to put a 200 megapixel camera in the phone. Whereas realistically, do you know what I mean? It's like diminishing returns. Like a 200 megapixel camera is not as important on a day-to-day basis, really, as the way that realistically the animations and how the UI
the reactions,
like those things make a lot of sense. They make more sense because you interact with the I don't know, going in and out of the app drawer or going into the recents menu or pulling down the notification shade. You do that hundreds / thousands of times a week. You use the camera needs to be top notch, but 100 versus 200 megapixels, and especially with Pixel bin in tech, you're not really seeing as much as you would with a fresh lick of paint in the animation stakes or improving just little things. Like, I do think that Samsung hasn't really taken to, while they have high refresh rate screens, they haven't made their animations work well for high refresh rate screens.
Well,
That's my interpretation of it anyway.
And
I feel as though it's just those little things. It's those little things. I think Google's doing that this year, especially because they had a big year last year. And maybe Samsung just needs to spend a little bit of time there, because we all know the hardware's exceptional. You buy an S. I mean, sometimes I've got my Note 10 sat on the desk, and sometimes when I use the Note 10, I think, like, this is incredible. This is still an incredible phone.
I missed it.
But
that's one of the notes that I didn't get to use. The Note 10 is the one that slipped away. I missed that phone for some reason. Do you know where you saying that brought up something? Those user experiences, and man, we talk about it more than we should. I'm a sucker for good haptics, right? But I'm not just a sucker for good haptics alone. I'm more of a sucker of how the haptics interact with the software. You know, the how, let's just say you're hitting the volume and you're going too high and you hit the limit and it just gives you like a little bump back. There's some OEMs that give you not just a bump, but it's like a bump back to the top and down, where you feel like, oh, I've hit the ceiling and it just made me drop. It's a little subtle thing, but it's a fun little kind of notification without looking like, oh, cool, I've hit the limit, nice. Or if I'm doing a scroll wheel on a timer or something, you can hit, like, there's little things, those little nuances, like, let you know how it feels. It almost feels like it's a tactile experience. I just want the experience to feel more, not just fluid, but tactile, like what you're saying. Work on those little things, because I'll be honest with you, you don't need no more than a 50 megapixel sensor in any phone. And the reason why I say this is, a bit technical. The way sensors are shaped in a square 4:3 aspect ratio, you notice that for video to be recorded, it needs to chop off the top and the bottom part. That chops off resolution. And that will go down to the resolution that you need for 8K, which is around 33, 34 megapixels. So you don't need any more than 50 megapixels. Once you get to 100, I'm like, that's your limit. Any more, in my opinion, I'm more scared of the processing time, especially when it comes to shutter response. I just think then you're doing too much in pixel binning, right? It's taking too long to kind of take these extra pixels, squeeze them down, then react, then shutter speed. You know, I don't want to see that. If you actually scale it and hit the limit of, we only need 50 megapixels because that's what's going to enable us to do specialty features like 8K, let's just work on that experience of it opening quicker, switching modes quicker, shutter response quicker, right? That the haptic feedback where it feels more like I'm using a physical camera. Those are little nuances, you know. And if they can get that right into One UI 5, like what you're saying, they need to really step up to the plate and make those big changes, as well as a proper lick of paint, you know. Sand it down and do it properly so that that layer matches the core differences and changes that Google are doing from what we're seeing from what they did with Android 12, but especially now that they're leaning into it with Android 13, especially when it comes to things like the bigger screen experience for foldables and also tablets. So I'm with you on that. And I hope we see it come when the foldables come. It may not be out of the box in terms of the software, but damn well hope so. By the fourth quarter, it needs to be the first ones on there, you know. So, any closing thoughts from you?
Maybe that I/O has kind of pinpointed what I care about more in a smartphone. I don't necessarily care about having the best of everything. I don't need the best of everything, really. I just want a pretty solid camera. I want a nice screen. And I want a fairly good battery. And then if the software is the vast majority of it to me. While the new hardware is really impressive, I think at the end of the day, I don't need to upgrade my phone every year. We're in a very privileged position where we get to spend a lot of time with new devices. But I think if I were not in this industry, I would be holding on to my phone as long as possible. And it looks as though, to me, speaking to you as well, and knowing how Samsung do their update schedule, if you're a Samsung fan, you would want Samsung to just keep supporting your devices as long as possible, because the longer that you have it, the more enjoyment you get from it. And also, it doesn't end up in landfill, because there's far too many phones going into landfill for no reason. So I'm hoping Samsung expands their update promises to other devices as well, because that's definitely put it into perspective, because Google didn't even save any part of the keynote to mention that they're going to give devices more Android upgrades. So realistically, the best bang for your buck in terms of if you want to have a phone in 5 years is still the A53 and the A33. There's nothing that comes close. And I thought they were pretty good phones as well.
Yeah, I agree, especially compared to, as you know, that nightmare of the A52 last year that I loathe with a passion. But I have to agree, and that's something that I think to look forward to. Is definitely something that could be added. So yeah, man, thank you for coming on, Damien.
No problem.
So let the audience know, like, where can they find you, Damien? Where can they find you?
You can find me on social media at I am Damien Wild is my Twitter handle. I'm hopefully Ben will put that in the description below as well in the show notes.
Definitely.
And then you can find me quite regularly on 95 Google's YouTube channel and on 95google.com. I post most of my videos and most of my articles go on there. You can also find I've got a personal YouTube channel as well that I try to upload weekly. It's one of those things that on
Sundays, man, you've been going consistent.
Yeah,
man.
you know as well as I do, and I don't know how you do it, but getting multiple uploads done per week from a personal channel is not something that I can do right now, but hopefully in the next few months. So you just search for Damien Wild on Google. You'll find all of my socials on there. But yeah, I do, on my own YouTube channel, I tend to spend a lot of time with older devices. I like looking back at products that have existed, because I'm definitely one of these people who would, if I wasn't in this industry, I'd be like a general tech fan. I would just be keeping my phone for as long as possible, making the most out of it, throwing custom ROMs on. But yeah, if you want old school devices and look backs at other hardware, come to my personal channel. If you want all of the latest on everything that Google's doing, be that Pixel, be that software, anything that happens to be related to Google, Android as well, 95google.com and their YouTube channel as well.
Man, we love to see it, Damien. Honestly, thank you for making this. Having a co-host, having a guest especially, not only makes it bearable, but I always say it makes it more fun. And you know, when we do stuff like this, making it a bit more fun makes that bit of a difference to just getting through it. So I really, really appreciate you taking your time to come over.
No problem at all.
Thank you for joining. Thank you all to our SamMobile Podcast listeners and viewers on the video platforms and all your favorite audio platforms for definitely tuning in and watching. Definitely give us a follow. give us a rating as well and let us know what your thoughts are on the podcast as well. And also, you don't want to miss this, and you want to make sure that you're always tuned in. First thing, make sure you turn the notifications as well across YouTube and also on the podcasting platforms. As always, we like to say, I hope you are all safe during this time, and we will most indeed see you next time.